Everybody, it's Katie Lane. Thank you so much for joining us during the webinar, Don't Sign That, How Agents and Attorneys Can Help You with Your Creative Career. I'm here with Jen Linnan, and we are both very excited for this afternoon and excited that so many of you were interested in joining us. So I'm going to give people just a couple more minutes to join us, but during that time, I'm gonna turn off my video and switch over to my avatar because Jen doesn't have video, and we want you to see us in our beautiful avatar selves and not get distracted by one of us being a cartoon and not. So I'm gonna turn off my camera, and let's see, Jen, do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Well, hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I know this is slightly less exciting than listening to the podcast, My Favorite Murder, but probably more helpful in the long run for your creative careers. So I am Jen Linnan. I have my own literary agency. It's just me and my cat. He's my assistant. I represent authors and illustrators, but I specialize in graphic works, so anything from comics to book-length graphic novels, illustration jobs, things like that. And I do a lot of work in kids lit, though I do represent all age projects. And Katie can talk a little bit about herself too.
Totally. So I'm an attorney. Don't let that scare you. I'm also a negotiation coach. I focus on working with artists and freelancers in particular, helping them understand their legal rights regarding intellectual property issues and help them understanding the contracts that they are asked to sign, making sure that the contracts are, an accurate representation of the deal that they thought they were making. And most of the folks that I serve right now are in comics, but I also represent authors, musicians, designers, a couple web designers, so all over the place. This afternoon, we have a presentation that we're going to use to walk through sort of an example of what the different jobs that attorneys and agents do. One of the things that made us want to do this webinar is Jen and I were talking and realized that sometimes our clients don't know how to get the most out of us. And we want to be taken advantage of. We're here to help. So, but not in a bad way. So we wanted to put together a presentation so that you understand the different ways in which agents and attorneys can help you, different ways in which different agents and attorneys contribute to your career, and then questions that you can ask and things that you can consider. We're going to use the live chat feature in the YouTube to consider questions. You can let us know if you can hear us, if you can't hear us, if you need us to repeat something. There is a bit of a delay between what we're saying and what the broadcast is. So if we don't respond immediately, it's not that we don't like you. It's just that it's delaying. Looks like maybe it's freezing for some of you. Hopefully that's gonna get fixed here in a second. I'm going to see if starting the screen share helps with that.
Yeah, so I mean, I think for both of us, going into our careers, we both watched The Little Mermaid and saw King Triton just not even glance barely at that contract before signing it, and then both, at the young age of whenever we saw that movie, we're like, well, if he had a rep, then things may have been different.
Yikes. Looks like some of the sound is breaking up for folks. It might be one of the settings in good old YouTube and how the events are going. I'll see if I can fix any of that in the behind the scenes. I don't know that I can. This is being recorded, and hopefully on the recording, the audio and the video will go together a little bit better. It may just be the internet here. Oh, Jen sounds fine. Yay! Good. So Jen, I'm gonna let you talk. I'm gonna see if maybe got some fans going on, and that might be interfering with things. So I'm gonna turn those off real quick, and then I'll come back and we can start the presentation.
Great. So I can start talking a little bit. I know what we were going to start out with is kind of generally what attorneys and agents do. And I was joking to Katie that, for my slide, I could just put an illustration from the popular children's book, Caps for Sale. Agents tend to wear a lot of different hats. I think of myself as sort of a life coach, but for your creative career. Everything from, getting your pitch together. It's something in the book industry, and this doesn't necessarily apply as much to illustrators and comic artists because they are kind of able to submit directly to art directors and editors. But in the book industry, typically if you're a prose author, many of the larger publishers won't look at your work unless you have an agent. It's a reason that agents have kind of become known as the gatekeepers of the industry. But I like to think of myself, if we're talking about gates, I'm the person who is throwing up the grappling hook rather than pouring down the hot oil.
Kind of you.
At least I think of myself that way. But so agents have a pretty large role in the industry at large of submitting creators' projects to the publishing houses and to the editors, and having a network of people knowing different editors' tastes and being able to kind of match make, as well as throwing that door open for you. But as well, there's so many other things that we can get involved in, both Katie and myself, and we'll go into that in more detail. What throughout the process, before publication, getting a deal, and even after that.
Yeah, absolutely. If you walk away with nothing else, it's that for the most part, as long as you're working with the right agent or attorney, we want to be helpful. We want your career to go well. We want you to be able to meet the goals that you have for yourself. And so we're not just there for the contract or the one particular thing that you originally come to us for. We, oh good, I'm glad I sound better. We're there for the whole thing. There are, I don't want to sound all cheesy, but I really genuinely enjoy this work, but part of the reason I enjoy it is because I get to help people. So let me help you. Not to be creepy about it, but okay. Thank you, Jen, for taking over while I made it a little bit better in here. I'm gonna go ahead and start the slideshow. Don't worry, guys, it's not gonna be lots of tiny bullet points.
We don't have any crossfades. I don't think so.
I know you can take them all out, which is just really. I feel like they show my very best self when I do a crossfade, or the sparkle.
Yes,
the sparkle. So you are watching and listening to Don't Sign That, How Agents and Attorneys Can Help Your Creative Career. I think Jen and I have let you know a little bit about who we are. This is how you can find us on Twitter. I'm at _Katie_Lane, and that's so you don't confuse me with the romance writer, though she has some very fine books if you're into Texas Cowboys.
And I'm just at Jen Linnan. Pretty simple. I think there's only one other Jen Linnan in the country, so pretty easy. Yeah.
What is your website?
My website is linnanliterary.com, but you can also search Google for anything like Linnan, Linnan Agent, Linnan Literary, and it will come up.
Because you've got that on lockdown.
I am the search engine optimization. It's great.
Well done. And if you want to find my website, I'm at workmadeforhire.net. And the net is important because it's, different from .com. So what do we do exactly? How often do you get this question, Jen? I get it semi-regularly. Like, okay, why would I need an attorney? Why would I need an agent?
Exactly. I'd say every time I get on the phone with a potential client, the first thing that I want to do is talk through what my role is, because I think it's important in any professional relationship to talk about expectations and also what your client is going to get out of it. and what they can expect, what they can ask of you. So we kind of have the slide set up here to talk about, there's different, obviously different discrete steps in the journey towards publication, and we can be there at different stages. I know Katie's going to talk about that more, but also you may not have an agent right off the bat. You might bring someone in later on, so we can talk about how we get involved at different places.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think of agents as helping them find the right publisher and maybe like negotiating the big parts of the deal, the money parts of the deal, and then a lawyer, if you're going to use one, would help with finalizing that deal, finalizing the contract, making sure it matches up with what you'd negotiated. But they don't necessarily see a role for an agent or an attorney on either side of those events. And it's not a situation where a creator, I think, has to use one of us in each of these steps if they don't want to. But like, I work with creators who are just starting out on working on a project, and they want to make sure that they can do what they're planning to do for the project without getting into problems with intellectual property concerns or copyright concerns, or they're doing a biography of somebody and they want to understand what the limitations are in what they can use of what that person has said, what that person has written, news reports that have been made about that person. So there's a role at the beginning, and I also regularly help people out when they're wanting to collaborate on something and they want an agreement that says specifically, all right, I'm going to do this part, you're going to do that part, and we're going to share money and rights in this particular way. And I like being at the very beginning because one of the things I can do is I can help make sure that every step after that lines up with what you told me your goals were. And if your goals change, that's totally fine, but at least you're making sure that you're taking the steps and doing the things that are supportive of what you wanted for that particular project, and you're avoiding potential conflict down the line. And on the other end of things, like after the book is out there in the world, there are likely to be licensing opportunities, and licensing opportunities are when somebody wants to make merchandise based on your book, or your book is optioned for film or television. Attorneys can play a really helpful role in making sure that those terms are right for the deal itself, but also make sure that the terms don't limit your ability to do other things that you might want to do. A lot of licensing agreements by default just give the person everything. They give the person licensing your work everything. And if you want to be able to use your work in a particular way, you don't want to give them permission to use everything. You only want to give them permission to, make t-shirts or work on a television pilot. And so an attorney can help make sure that the agreement doesn't give more permission than is necessary to the person who's paying you, and still gives you the flexibility of using your rights the way that you want to.
Yeah, and I think on the agent side, I talked a little bit about kind of getting your pitch ready and matchmaking and finding an editor. But it can also be, talking about the market in general with your agent, what sorts of projects are doing well, what are editors looking for, and on the flip side, after the deal is made, and agents too can be involved in the contract and should be, but it can depend on the individual agent as to how in-depth their experience is. But after that contract is signed, the agent is really your liaison with your publisher or your client. And they're there, to potentially play bad cop if you need it, to keep your relationship with your editor or your client focused on the creative stuff, and it kind of removing the burden from you of stepping in to fix things. It can also, be someone, agents can anticipate problems. They can kind of speak the lingo of the industry and explain that lingo to you, the norms of what the process looks like from contract to publication and after publication. And again, like Katie said, sorry.
I just wanted to, I think that's a really important point, that a lot of times creators, particularly with their first book or their second book, the process is really new. This is by definition the first time that you're going to go through the editing process and the marketing process and licensing process with a publisher. You may have done it on your own if you've self-published in the past, but it's very different with a publisher, and it's very different depending on who that publisher is, who that editor is. And I think agents are underused by creators, because agents have done this many times before. They have walked this path many, many times before, and they have a really keen understanding of how things go at different publishing houses, how different editors behave. And so I know I'm supposed to be the I really wish creators would connect with their agents more often through the process and say, hey, is this normal? Can you help me understand that? Can you tell me what to expect? That sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it's definitely something, and I know we're gonna have a whole section on this about how to best utilize your representative, whether it's an agent or an attorney or both. And definitely, like, communication is the top thing on the list.
Yes, please, and yes.
But yeah, so I guess I think we can go kind of into the specifics of things. We've got our next slide popping up is our little Venn diagram, which is, I forget, we're on a delay, but there we go.
Yeah, totally. I think one of the things that comes up for people sometimes is they're confused as to where the difference is between attorneys and agents, because for the most part, agents and attorneys both help with negotiations, contracts, and they can give you advice on what to do, what not to do, how to consider different offers. And Jen, do you want to talk about how agents can differ in this area, or do you want to jump into your slide just talking about the specific things that you do?
I mean, we can jump. I mean, it's all gonna blend in.
Okay.
But yeah, I think, I said a little bit about the agent's role can be really broad, whereas an attorney has kind of a really deep specialization, and even down to like sometimes case precedent if you're talking about specific issues in book contracts. Agents kind of have a really long span and different hats. So I think I touched on most of this already, but I'd say the main difference is, again, getting your project in the door with some publishers, depending on whether they have restrictions on unsolicited projects. Editing, a lot of times people will come to me and say, like, I have a pitch. I'm not sure if I have enough of a pitch to send out, if it's ready to go, if the manuscript needs to be tightened up. For artists, sometimes it's, how much sample art do I need to include in a submission? Is a couple of pages okay? Do they need a huge chunk? Because that's a lot of work up front. And if you can have a pitch ready to go without having a whole finished drawn book, that makes a big difference.
It's a huge difference, and having that inside knowledge from somebody about like what the norm is, but then also of the editors that like you're going to identify for your clients. What are their particular likes and dislikes? What is that publisher been paying attention to recently? What's been working well for them? What's not? I feel like
Everything from, so-and-so at Big House number 2 really wants a book about ghost robots, and, very specific things, and also, broader things like, people are getting a lot of, at the time it was a lot of dystopian YA or vampire novels, knowing the kinds of things that editors are getting a lot of and stuff that they're really looking for, and just really staying abreast of that in the genres. Yeah, ghost robots. Now I actually really want
to be fair, I would read the hell out of that book.
Please, if anyone has a story about that. I mean, it was just off the tip of my brain. But exactly, like, knowing what editors are looking for, knowing what they need to see in order to make a deal happen, because a lot of the times it's not just convincing, at a Big House, it's not just convincing the editor, it's convincing their publisher, the rest of the editorial team, the sales people, the marketing people. They have to get a really good idea of the finished book. So it's all of that. And then as far as submitting it, sending it out, and then advising and getting you the best deal, I think is really important, because just like we're going to talk about how to find the best rep, getting the best deal is not just about the money. It is all about what that house can do for you, how they can position you in the market. If it's your debut book, what is going to come after? Mm-hmm. Whether the editor has the same vision for your story as you do is really, really huge. And a good rep will, talk you through all of that stuff and tell you the questions to be asking, and make sure that, you're not giving away, like Katie said, valuable rights that you could use later on.
Yeah, I think one of the things that, particularly with creators where it's their first book, or it's relatively earlier in their career, one of the invisible terms that an agent or an attorney can really help you with is marketing and understanding what to expect from the publisher when your book comes out. Because Jen, I don't know if you'd agree, but in my experience, very rarely is a marketing plan addressed in the contract, because
right.
They don't know what the manuscript's going to look like when it's done. They don't know a lot, so they're not going to commit to a lot. But you don't want to commit to a publisher who has consistently had a hard time marketing this particular type of book, or it tends to make really big promises and doesn't always follow through. And I think having an agent who's familiar with your area and the publishers that publish in your area can be really helpful for avoiding that problem. I've talked to a number of creators where they thought they were going to get one thing, it wasn't in the agreement, they signed it, and now they're disappointed because they didn't know how to ask about it, and they ended up not getting what they wanted.
And for the record, that applies to choosing your agent as well.
Good point.
If you are a science fiction writer, you don't want to be looking for representation from someone who only does self-help books. Mm-hmm. Like you want to target your audience and target your champion, and know that they have done a good job of selling your type of book before. And Katie's case, I know you wouldn't want to approach, an IP lawyer necessarily, or an environmental lawyer with, can you write a will for me?
Yeah, it's I have had a couple of situations where people said, well, I asked my dad's friend who's an estate attorney to look over the contract, and he said he thought it was okay. And that just makes me cry inside, because an estate attorney helps people figure out what happens to their property when they die. And the chance of them ever having looked at a publishing agreement is really low. And they're not having familiarity with the document, they're not going to be looking out for the same things that an attorney who specializes in publishing or specializes in helping creators is going to see. And with the right attorney, they're going to tell you, oh, I don't know that, or I don't have experience with that, or I have a little experience with that and I feel comfortable up to this point, but I'm going to recommend that we work with somebody else if it gets past X, Y, and Z. Because an attorney's job is to help you understand your legal rights. To be able to do that, they have to be familiar with what those rights are in this particular situation and how they're used. I had an experience where another attorney whom I really respect, he's a super smart guy. He's a trademarks attorney, which means he helps people protect their brands, essentially. And he had a friend who had a publishing agreement, and he called me and he was like, Katie, some of these terms are freaking ridiculous. Like, they just don't make sense. And I said, oh, tell me what you're talking about. And he told me, and I was like, oh, sorry, Mike, that's totally normal. He was like, this is insane. And I said, I know, but that is how the publishing industry has dealt with that particular problem. And so if he had really pushed forward without reaching out to somebody else on the negotiation and tried to go really hard on getting his client that particular term, it's possible that he could have had a negative impact on the rest of the negotiation, because he could have gotten something that, on paper was good, but his client might not have been able to really use, and sacrificed getting other terms that would have been more helpful for the client in the long run. So because an attorney is there to help you understand your legal rights, you want to work with somebody who's familiar with what those rights are and how they work. I also think the other job of an attorney is making sure that the legalese doesn't get in the way of the deal. So I will oftentimes see contracts that are poorly written, overwritten, heretofore.
Notwithstanding the foregoing.
Notwithstanding the foregoing, they are shit.
That's my favorite.
Yeah, so they can be really overwritten, and I have a lot of theories as to why that happens. But one of the things that I really hate running into is it's overwritten and not overwriting that fancy language that makes the lawyer feel better about themselves actually interrupts and disagrees with the deal that you and your editor, or your agent and your editor, have figured out. And having an attorney read it over who's familiar with how legal language is parsed can help you avoid those pitfalls. And then the other thing I do on a regular basis is I help my clients by drafting and reviewing legal documents. So that could be, I'm helping them by drafting a collaboration agreement because they're working with somebody on a new comic and they want to make sure that everybody is on the same page as it relates to their contributions. Or I might be reviewing a licensing agreement, or I might be reviewing the final version of a publishing agreement. I did that for a client just the other day. Their agent had negotiated a great deal, but they wanted to make sure that they understood all of their rights and obligations under the agreement. And so I looked it over and gave them a summary of it. And I said, hey, if any of these things happen, be sure to let your agent know. And if any of these things happen, give me a call, because we're going to want to take care of them in this way.
Yeah, and I think, contracts, especially, we could do an entire webinar on, I know Katie has done, I think.
And I will do
what?
Agreements.
I think I've said many times to clients, the contract should not only represent your deal that you made, the deal points, but it should also give you a good idea of the hypotheticals. And a lot of the times, what I see in contracts that are missing, and why, someone like Katie or myself is someone that you want in your corner, is it's the omissions that get you into the most trouble. And, if you're asking questions, when you read through your contract, you should ask the questions, the horror scenarios. So what happens if the relationship goes bad and I want my rights back? How do I do that? Mm-hmm. The contract should answer those. And I think having a representative who's really familiar with industry standards and what kinds of things can happen in a publishing relationship is really important, because it shouldn't be your job to think of everything.
But you can't really, right? Like,
right. It's good to outsource.
Yeah, it borrows somebody else's brain. So one of the other things that we wanted to do is answer a couple questions that folks had asked before the webinar. And one of the questions was, what questions should I ask if I'm thinking of hiring someone to represent me? And this person's particularly wanted to know, like, what questions should I ask an agent to make sure that they're on the ball? Which I really
love that.
Really love that. So Jen, do you have
yes.
recommendations?
I have a laundry list. There are a ton of really great resources online. Agents who have blogged about things you should ask, things that you can research. I was talking to Katie ahead of this, and we were saying, of course, for Katie, at client attorney privilege, you might not get a list of her clients online, or, specific deals that she's worked on. But for agents, you absolutely can. And so one of the things that you should do even before you talk to an agent is, do your research, look at the sales that they've made, the houses that they've worked with, the clients that they work with, and, ask yourself what you're looking for and whether it meets your needs.
Hey, Jen, where would somebody look if they wanted to know what deals a particular agent had made and with what houses?
Very good question. Well, one way to reverse engineer it from looking for the type of agent you want is to look in the acknowledgments section of your favorite books, books that are similar to yours. Another industry resource is publishersmarketplace.com or Publishers Weekly. They have deal reports where you can search by agent. I think part of it is there is like a free newsletter that goes out weekly. There is more information that's behind a paywall, but most agents will have their own member pages be public, and they'll list, their most recent deals. You can also sometimes find that on the agents' websites themselves on a blog or on a news page. But it's a good way to, a Publishers Marketplace, you can kind of keyword search, look by genre. Another really good site that's recent is Manuscript Wishlist, and there's a main site, and then there's a little spin-off site that's not the real one. So I will bring that up. But it's a place where agents and editors can post what kind of books they're looking for, like ghost robots. It's manuscriptwishlist.com is the site.
Yeah, and I'm including a link to that one, the official one, in the chat, the live chat, so you can grab it there.
So there's a lot of really good resources. There are also much larger databases that you can search. The two that I know of are Agent Query and Query Tracker, and you can search by genre. You can see, you can actually track your own queries to agents on that site, and you can see other people's comments about how fast people respond and the types of clients they work with. So there's a ton out there. But as far as when you are actually on the phone with a representative who's made an offer to you, says, I love your work, I want to work with you, you should definitely think of it as an interview. But the thing that I often see is that when I get on the phone with someone, they feel like I'm interviewing them. I already love them. If I'm on the phone with them, I already want to work with them, and I think they're great. They should be interviewing me. And they should find out, if they can't get that information online, they should ask me, who I'm working with. They can ask me how hands-on or hands-off I am editorially or on contracts, what my specific experience is. If I sell subsidiary rights, like we were talking about licensing, do I sell those rights myself, translation rights, audio, film, and TV, or do I work with co-agents? And if so, who do I work with?
Yeah, really quickly, subsidiary rights are the rights to make things based off of or that are related to the book. So there are things like Jen mentioned, like translations. Sometimes it's different versions of the book, like a different edition, or including part of the work in an anthology. And so sometimes it's referred to as ancillary and subsidiary rights. Similar. I think the only real difference is as far as lawyers are concerned. But ancillary rights are usually when we're talking about things like creating merchandise or doing a television show or a play based on the book. And some agents will do the whole meal deal, and some agents will do what Jen just mentioned, which is work with a co-agent. And so they have another agent who has a specialty in selling and representing those rights. And so they'll work with the co-agent in that situation. And Jen, I know you're the agent, so I don't want to keep talking about agents, but one of the things I make sure to tell people is if you're working with an agent who is working with a co-agent, make sure that you understand how they get paid. So it shouldn't mean that you have to pay more for that benefit. It should mean that behind the scenes, the agents are splitting their percentage. And Jen, if you disagree,
yeah. So actually, that is something that is really good to ask if you don't know from the agent's website, or the attorney for that matter, is how that person gets compensated. And that is something that, there are agents out there, agents in like the air quotes, who will charge fees, and that's against every industry ethical, guideline out there. The standard for agents, which is very different from attorneys, is that agents work on a commission-only basis, and the standard for that is 15% of any income that comes in on contracts that they negotiate. And that's something you want to find out up front, is how is your agent compensated? Because if there is anything, if they say, oh, well, we charge a reading fee, or you need to pay us up front, run away.
As fast as you can.
Because with agents, the money should always be going from the publisher, sometimes through the agent to you, but it should never go from you to the agent. And it should never be anything up front.
Yeah, absolutely. Lawyers can be a little bit different. Some entertainment lawyers will work based on a percentage of the deals that they negotiate for you, in which case you want to pay attention to how many people are taking a percentage. Because if you're working with an agent and an attorney who's taking a percentage, and then maybe even a manager or a PR person, it can be, you want to control how much you're giving to other people, and make sure that what you're getting for that percentage is what you need. It's of the level and quality that you need. Other attorneys will charge either by the hour, or they'll charge a flat fee for doing a specific project. It's perfectly reasonable to ask how an attorney charges and what their rate is, what their average cost is for doing a particular kind of deal. That is, I think a lot of people are intimidated to ask those questions. It's perfectly fine. You are interviewing someone to see if you want to pay them to do work for you. You need to understand what that price might be, so that you can find the person who has the skills and qualities that are going to be most important to you, as well as somebody who you can afford. It's okay if, none of us, when we're first starting out, need the top line product, right? And so sometimes the top line attorney is not the best fit for you for a particular project. There are a couple other questions that I think you should ask if you're talking to an attorney, and one of them is, how often do you do work like this? How often have you done it in the past? I think it's okay to ask them if there are current or past clients of theirs that they could tell you about. Some clients are totally fine with saying, yeah, I work with Katie, and so I can say, yes, I represent so-and-so. It really just depends. And a lawyer will tell you if they can't share that information with you, but they should be able to share with you what their experience is. And you want to make sure that the experience that they have lines up with the need that you have. I have people ask me all the time, how often do you do X, Y, and Z? And I want to be really honest, because it doesn't work well for me if you come expecting one thing and that's not what I can give you, but we didn't uncover that mismatch of expectation early enough in the process, and you're disappointed. That doesn't make me happy either. Daniel had asked a couple questions in the chat about agents and finding somebody who can represent a pitch that's based on another project. And then there was also, are agents paid based on profits, or how does that work out? And I think Jen, you addressed that. It's not quite profit,
so it's basically, if, for example, with a book contract, typically the publisher will pay an advance, and if that advance, so that fee up front, if that fee up front is made back in the percentage of profits that you get in the contract, the royalties, then you get royalties on top of it. And we can go into that in plenty of detail. But for agents, generally, any money that's coming to you from that contract, they will take their commission percentage from it. So if you only make $1,000, they'll take 15% of $1,000. If you end up being Dan Brown, and we all wish, then your agent is doing very well also. And it's something that you want to be aware of, that the agent is working with you and doing that work up front, not knowing whether your book will sell. That's actually a really good question to ask as well, is what happens in the relationship if the book doesn't sell? Because a lot of times it takes a couple books, or it takes some time to make the right deal. And you want to know whether the agent that you are speaking with, if they're going to say, well, if we can't sell it after a year, then we'll part ways. Or maybe the agent will say, you know what, like, then we'll try the next project, or we'll send it out to another round of editors. You want to know, like, what the relationship, what they have in mind for the length of that relationship. Do they want to represent you for just one project, or do they want to be with you, for the length of your career? And the same goes for attorneys. Do you want to have them by your side for every book and every freelance project you do, or do you just need help once on a one-off contract? So that's something to ask as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to remember that, again, you are interviewing someone to see whether or not you want to pay them money to do work for you. So make sure that don't be intimidated asking questions. Again, this may be your first time interviewing an agent or interviewing an attorney, but it's not the first time that the agent or the attorney has been interviewed to do work like what you're talking to them about. And so I think a good representative will want to provide you with as much information as possible, and they'll not make you feel bad for asking questions. They'll want to encourage questions because they want to make sure that this is a good fit for everybody.
And I was going to say, like, if you get on the phone with someone and they're hesitant to answer a question, or the answer feels weird, that's also a really good indication of, what the relationship might be like.
Yeah, that might not be the best person for you.
Yeah.
There are a couple other things that we wanted to make sure that we touched on, so I want to go forward with the slides. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat box to ask us. We want to make sure that this is time that is useful for you and that you walk away with helpful and good information. one of the things that we want to make sure that you do is that you make the most out of your representative. So you're either going to be paying them a percentage of what your projects make, or you're going to be paying them based on an hourly rate. So you should get your money's worth. And one of the best ways of doing that is to ensure that there's a lot of communication between you and your representative. I always like knowing what my clients' larger goals are. Because if I understand where this particular project fits in with their career goals, I can provide better advice. I can say, you know, I normally wouldn't think of this as the best deal for the project, but because you want to do these other 3 things, I think that this makes sense. There's a lot of, as you well know, in building a creative career, there are a lot of things that are dependent on one another and that are related. And by letting your agent or your attorney understand, hey, this is the big picture for me, they can identify opportunities that you might not have noticed, and they can give you better advice on the risks of agreeing to do different deals or do certain work. The other thing is update your agent or your attorney on your projects at least once every 6 months, pretty please.
For me, it's like, if it's not weekly, no. I love getting, I like to be CC'd on everything. If you're corresponding with your publisher or a client, and it's totally cool to take a step back and not have your agent on if you're talking about edits or creative stuff. But it's really helpful so that we can stay in the loop if something comes up, like, you know, you get your cover design for your book, and, you know, it's something that you don't really feel totally great about, but it's your first book. So, you know, of course, like, the publisher is excited about it, so let's go. Your agent would then say, hey, you know, if you're not happy, let's negotiate it. Let's you know, let's fix the design. Let's see what changes we can make. I have one example was a YA novel where the cover illustration was gorgeous, but they got the protagonist's hair color wrong. And I don't know about you all, but when I used to read books when I was younger and stare at those beautiful illustrated covers, if they got details wrong, like the eye color or like the clothing, I was mad.
Totally, because that's not the character, right? Like, that's not
so
not you're reading.
It's things like that where your agent can sometimes tell you, hey, no, you actually do have some leverage here and we can ask for more. And as far as upcoming work, I love to know what's in the pipeline, because it means that when you finish writing, you know, those 3 other books that you have stewing, I'm going to be sending them out. So that actually helps me balance my workload too, and start putting together lists.
Totally. And I had a friend recently whose book just came out, and the cover that they ended up coming out with is great. It's fantastic. I love it. And she's been able to use it really well for her marketing. But the first cover that her editor loved and was ready to go with, she hated, and she felt really bad. But she also felt kind of like she didn't know what to do, because she had gotten a decent sized advance for the book, and she was in the process of edits, and there were a lot of different pressures in how the book was coming out. And she mentioned it, and I said, talk to your agent. Like, go home tonight and send your agent an email and tell him that you do not like it and why. And she said, yeah, I don't want to be seen as like picky. And I said, no, he's going to love it. He wants to know that you're picky. He wants to know what you like. He wants to know what's going on. And he's going to do what he can to help. And they addressed it. They got a much better cover. But yeah, I see a lot of creators feeling like they'll get into those situations where there's conflicts and they feel like they don't have a tool, or they don't have an advocate that they can turn to, in part because they think, oh, the agent was really only there for the contract negotiation, or the attorney is only there for, when there's a problem. And that's not necessarily true. We can help out at lots of different times along the way. And that goes to the next next point, which is let us know how your deals work out. Because if they work out well, that's great. That's great information for us to have, not only about that particular project, but the other party. But if they don't work out, if they work out poorly, that's also really important for us to know, because then we're not going to put you in a position to run into that in the future. And we're not going to recommend that you work with somebody like that or work on a job that's going to put you in similar, demand similar things of you. I've had clients like apologize to me because a deal that I negotiated didn't work out well for them, or that didn't work out as well as they wanted. And I can't tell you how sad that makes me, because I want to know. It's important for me to know.
Exactly.
And if I can help, I want to help out in the midst of it.
It's something like that. I think is the biggest thing, is once you have a representative, you have a partner, you have an advocate, and all of those feelings where you feel like you're in a tense position with your editor or your client, something feels off, you don't want to complain, don't want to stir the pot, tell your agent or your attorney, because like we are the complaint department. We can take that and then go to your editor and say, we need this to improve, without it coming from you. It's coming from you, but it's coming from a third party who is, on your side, but can also speak the editor's language and say, like, look, you've asked for all this additional work, and for example, for an illustration job, and maybe the contract is signed, everything was great, and now there are all these revisions. Is it normal? Things are getting intense with deadlines. We can step in and say, hey, how firm is this deadline? Do you have wiggle room? And it can help keep your relationship with your editor, your art director, positive, and it can take all of the complaining negative stuff, and we get to be the bad guys, and they kind of expect that from us.
Totally. My mom always used to tell us when we were kids that if we didn't want to accept an invitation to something, or if we didn't want to play at somebody's house, we could always say that she wouldn't let us. We could always use her as an excuse. She just said, just tell me when you do that, so I don't accidentally disagree with you in public. And I tell my clients the same thing. You can always use me as the excuse for why you can't do something or why something's not right. Just let me know so that I can back you up. Being the person saying no is totally fine. I don't care about the other attorney liking me. I care about making sure that you're getting the best deal and that you're having the right experience. There were a couple questions. I think we've gone over a lot of the bullet points on this next slide, but there are a couple questions in the slide I wanted to make sure that we addressed. And Jen, you might have insight on this. Tips and advice specifically about looking for an illustration representative. Is anything different from a rep with writing or full graphic novels?
Well, there are actually illustration agencies. Like if you are not writing at all and you're just doing illustration, there are agencies that specifically represent illustrators only. As far as graphic stuff where you are, like comics or graphic novels where you are writing or collaborating with someone and putting together a book with a story, and that can include picture books too. Many agents will list that under their genres, and they don't necessarily need to specialize in it, unless you are looking for someone, who has worked with a specific house. Like you want someone, maybe you have an offer from Dark Horse or, Image, and you want someone who's familiar with their contracts. You would do the research and see who has done deals at those places. But in general, most agents are open to graphic works within the genres and the age levels that they represent.
Yeah, and I would also say it kind of depends on where you want your illustrations to be. If you are looking more for placement in magazines or use in advertising, that's different from being an illustrator for a book. There will be representatives that do some crossover, but it's gonna, they are different things.
Yeah,
just like different things for you, they are different. They are different in terms of representation.
Yeah, I think it's also, there are differences. Some illustration agencies, there's the expectation that they will also get you jobs, and that's a little different. Some agents will do portfolio submissions and things like that, and others won't. So that's another thing that you'll want to add to your list of questions to ask.
I see that we've got like about technically 5 minutes left. I'm happy to stay on and continue answering questions. So if you guys want to hang out with us, we're not going to go anywhere. And Jen, if you end up having to leave, that's totally cool.
Yeah, I'm good for now.
Cool. There was a question about if you want to track down a particular agent attorney team from a book that's in the same genre as yours. How do you find them? They're not usually published. Usually it's easier to find out who somebody's agent is than their attorney, because the agent likes bragging about the fact that they represent the person, and the person likes saying, hey, talk to this agent instead of coming to me with your pitches. So sometimes that's the easiest first way to start. I also, usually when people ask me, how do I find an attorney for X, I say, ask those peers, ask those people. If you're at a comic book convention, or if they're on Twitter or something like that, you can just be like, hey, I really liked what you did. I'm also doing work in that vein, and I'd really appreciate being able to talk to a representative who understands it. Can you tell me who your attorney is? In my experience, unless the relationship is bad, they'll tell you.
Yeah, and I think it's really, again, same way as kind of looking up the info yourself, talking with other creators and seeing like who's happy with their rep and who's not, and who do they work with, can be really helpful.
Totally, and ask somebody why they're happy with their representative or why they're not happy with their representative, because I see a lot of people sort of jumping on the bandwagon with somebody and then finding out, oh wait, this person works in a way that's totally different from my style, or they're not doing the thing that's most important to me. So it's part of it is understanding who they're working with. The other part is understanding why they like working with that other person. Kel has asked some questions, which I think are really helpful, about having a balance between a self-published career and a traditional publishing career, and how much information is helpful for the representative to know about the goals in both areas. And I would say as much as you are willing to share, because
Absolutely.
Right, you can only do so much work at one time. So making sure that the representative understands what the balance is and what freedoms you need when you're making promises to do new jobs. I will often talk to people who they've gotten an offer to publish a particular book, but they tell me that they also want to make sure that they can keep working on their webcomic that they've been publishing for the last 5 years. There is language in a lot of traditional publishing contracts that would limit you from being able to do that. But if the agent or the attorney is aware, they can help carve that out and explain to the editor or explain to the contract manager on the other side why that's not a risk for the publisher. So I would say as much information as you can share, as you feel comfortable sharing, is going to be helpful. And then the other question that Kel asked is, oftentimes with comics, we have teams of writers and artists, and if you're looking for representation on a particular book, how do you approach it if you're not sure that that team is going to be a team on lots of other projects? And Jen, I'm curious to know your...
Yeah, I've seen that a lot. I mean, for me personally, if I have, one of my clients is collaborating with someone on one of their books, and maybe they're collaborating with a bunch of different people on a bunch of different projects, I kind of always keep in the back of my mind that, like, if I'm submitting that book with the two of them, that it's possible that I may end up working with the collaborator long-term as well. I always kind of keep a little space open for collaborators. But I think, if you're the artist and you're working with the writer, and the writer has the agent and you're not specifically represented, it's totally cool to ask the agent, write to them and say, hey, I'd like to be, formally represented by you, and have that conversation, to see if they're available and interested to rep the rest of your work. Or they may say, you know, you should have an agent also, and we can work, you know, I'll work with your agent and we'll sell it together.
Absolutely. I think it's really important to have that conversation of who is being represented and by whom, because if you approach an agent and the agent has a previous relationship with one of the collaborators but not the other, you want to make sure that they either you understand that the representation is really only for that previous client, or you want to establish that the agent should represent both of you during the process. Attorneys are a little bit more limited when it comes to representing multiple parties, but I will do it in certain situations where I feel confident that I can represent both parties without any negative impact to either one of them. So it doesn't happen a whole ton, but it can happen. And the other thing is that when it happens and I can't represent both parties, it's not that like I then like throw the other person out on the street and say, nah, go fend for yourself. I try to make sure that I can like find either an attorney that would be a good fit for them or introduce them to agents, because they should be represented too. If I can't do it, it doesn't mean that they have to go forward without representation. It means that, you know, we need to find representation that's going to make sure that they are well represented, not to be repetitive. Ursula, I really like your question.
Oh yeah, this is a great question.
And I think we've got it on another slide, which is, if I worked with another rep previously and it wasn't a productive experience, when is the right time to disclose this to the person? Particularly, I think this happens with agents. I mean, I guess it happens with agents and attorneys. I've had people come to me and say, I had a really bad experience. I don't want that to happen again. I appreciate knowing it, not like in the first email I get, but definitely in that first conversation. And particularly if we're talking face-to-face or on the phone, because it gives me the ability to ask questions and understand the context. Like, what is it that didn't work out? And what were the things that weren't a good fit? Because if I think that you would potentially have the same problem with me, I want to know up front so that I can then point you to somebody that I think would be a better fit. But if I don't think I'm going to have that problem in representing you, one, I can tell you and save you time. But two, I can also be cognizant of that as our relationship is developing and make sure that I'm giving you the best representation or the representation that you need.
And on my end, like, I like to know as soon as possible before we agree to start working together is really important. Not because I would change my mind if that just born from the fact that you didn't like someone once. It's more along the lines of, you know, again, like Katie said, am I going to be the same kind of fit? Am I going to be a better fit? But also strategically and important for the project that you're sending into the agent, I want to know whether editors have seen it before. And maybe your past agent did a really bad job of sending it out and didn't send it to the right people and kind of threw it at the wall. It happens. But I want to know, okay, you know, X, Y, and Z editors have seen it before. I'll know then not to send it to the same people, and we can kind of have a more productive strategy discussion over what to do with the project. And that's really important to know, because you don't want to have your agent, you know, start working on a project and then find out that it's been at every publishing house in the city, because they'll feel like it wasn't, you know, that there wasn't, you know, any trust there.
And it also limits the agent's ability to represent that work well, right? Because they don't know that they're pitching somebody who's already looked at it and said no.
And the other thing too is, if you have a project in the drawer that hasn't sold and it was with another agent, I might say, okay, well, it's been a couple years since it went out. The market has changed. Now we can send it out again. Mm-hmm. Or maybe, you know, what kind of responses did I get? Do we need to revise it? Do we want to start with a different project? There's all those conversations can happen as long as your rep knows, you know, the history of the project.
Yeah. Also, it's important to note that oftentimes when you sign an agreement with an agent, if the agent has represented a piece of your work and then the relationship ends, there's usually language in the agreement that says, if you sign another deal for this work in the next 6 months or the next 12 months, I'm still going to get my commission because I originally represented it. So that's another important reason for letting a prospective representative know, hey, this work's already been represented, and here are the terms that might still cover it. Because then it's, you can strategize with the new representative as to what's going to make the most sense. There's a question before about contracts that I want to address, but I also want to. Anne's got a really good question about our opinions in terms of using pseudonyms.
Oh, that's a good one.
I think so too. Do you want to take the first crack at it?
Well, so pseudonyms, I think most important, your agent needs to know your real name, your legal name for contract purposes. Also for copyright purposes, which I'm sure Katie can talk about more. Pseudonyms, I think, are totally fine. Look at J.K. Rowling. If you want to publish outside your genre, if you want to get a fresh start, if you had a book come out and it had really bad sales, and you know that prospective publishers are going to look at those sales numbers and might color their opinion of what your next book will perform, you can start over with a different name. You can, if you want to get closer to the beginning of the alphabet so you get show up better on the shelves in the bookstore. If you need to be anonymous for work reasons. I have a colleague who works mostly with romance authors, and several of her authors write under pseudonyms because, for example, they may be in jobs where that wouldn't look so good for them to have very steamy erotica. It's totally okay. But Katie should tell you about the ramifications.
Yeah, with pseudonyms, when you register the copyright, a different term will apply to the copyright if it's registered under a pseudonym and the Copyright Office isn't aware of who that pseudonym is associated with. And so they sort of put a generic 99-year term on the copyright because copyrights typically last the life of the author plus 70 years. Well, if they don't know who the author is, they don't know when that person died, so they can't add 70 years to it. So they give a generic term to the book. That said, copyright terms are pretty long, so chances of it having a huge practical impact would be slim. But for instance, J.K. Rowling, she probably would like her family to continue benefiting from her work, and so it's important that the term be properly figured. The other thing, though, is you want to make sure that you can get paid. If you get a check in a name that is not your legal name, it's really hard to cash. So making sure that your legal name is known to the publisher so that you can get paid properly. And if you really want to be anonymous, there are also other ways of setting that up. We can set up a corporation and the corporation becomes the author, and there are ways of providing anonymity if it's necessary, but let your representative know, and then let them know why, because there are simple ways of dealing with it, but they're harder if it comes up later. The other question that we had that I wanted to make sure that we addressed was, at what point do I bring up that I want to show the contract to my attorney or my agent? Which is a fantastic question. I think a lot of times, it feels awkward. And I would say sooner rather than later. I think it makes sense to say, usually there's that initial conversation with an editor and a creator, and the editor will sort of pitch the idea to the creator, or if the creator has brought the project to the editor, they'll talk about what's possible. And then I think it's perfectly reasonable to say, please send over the contract. I'd love to take a look at it, and I'm going to need my agent or my attorney to be involved. You want to, I would say with traditional publishing, you want to bring in your agent sooner rather than later, because you don't want your editor to feel like they got misled and they agreed, or they tried to set up terms to the deal without realizing that you were represented.
I would say, to clarify that, I would say tell them before you actually say the word yes to anything. Because like Katie was saying, editors will send you deal terms like the money, the royalty percentages, things like that. And by the time the contract gets drafted, those deal terms are already set in stone. So if you're only bringing an agent in at the contract stage, they may not be able to change the things that came before that, like what rights you're giving the publisher. And it just makes it a lot trickier because they're no longer talking to your editor, they're talking to the publisher's legal department, contracts department, and who already thinks, okay, well, this deal is already closed.
That's a really good point. In publishing, so deal terms are usually negotiated with the editor, and then once the deal terms are agreed on, that's when the contract gets drafted. And then if there are any negotiations regarding the contract, that's when it's turned over to either the legal department, or sometimes there's a department called contracts management. And so when those negotiations happen, they're not happening with somebody who's invested in getting your book made. They're happening with somebody who negotiates these contracts on a regular basis and is really and has different incentives for agreeing to changes or rejecting changes. So with traditional publishing, there's a pretty set process. I would say it is looser in comics, as many things are, but it's still, I think it's sooner rather than later. And Rinkwin asked a similar question about, you've got a publisher saying they definitely want to work with you. When do you get that agent? When do you get that attorney? And what I always tell people is, if you have a publisher who's saying that they want to work with you, you can find an agent who will work with you, because you're coming to them with a deal in hand, right? It's a lot different from, I would like you to shop this book around and see if we can find a deal. It's, I have this deal and I want to make sure that I make the most of it. And similarly with an attorney, I will definitely prioritize working with a creator who is in need of representation, because I am worried about establishing that whole process of setting the deal terms in stone too early, and that being detrimental to the creator. So I would say, if the conversation is going well, start reaching out, start with your friends. And
the other thing, go for it. The other thing that you can do too is, if you don't have an agent by the time a publisher says, yes, we want to work with you, you can ask that editor, do they have recommendations? And in that case, you get, not only you have an offer in hand, but you have a referral from an editor who says, okay, this person, I trust this person, they're good to work with. I've done a lot of deals with them. They know the contracts, they're experienced. They're not going to recommend someone who is a scam artist, or someone who is not good to work with and isn't a solid person.
Totally.
But again, yes, you can say to that publisher or editor, you can absolutely stall a bit and say, hey, thank you so much. I'm really glad that you like this work. You want to work with me. Is it okay if I take a moment and get signed up with an agent before I officially say anything, about the terms? And most of them will give you a little time, and they'll understand that.
Totally. And my only tweak to that would be, I would say, I need to take some time and talk with my agent or my attorney. It is perfectly reasonable for you to have representation, and you don't need to feel like you have to ask for permission from somebody.
That is a good tweak.
So I think, Jen, that is great advice. I just I like to coach people with how they ask questions. So I think we're about almost 15 minutes over, so I think we're going to end it there. Again, thank you so much for participating and for all of the good questions. We're excited that we can get some of this information out in the world. If you think this was valuable and that we should do it again, or that you have other things that you think it would be helpful for us to talk about, please send us a line or, shout out on Twitter. Let us know what is helpful, because we both like making sure people know what they need to know. And again, you can find me on Twitter at @_Katie_Lane.
And I'm at Jen Linnan. And obviously, if anything comes up, questions, we want to make sure that you guys have the resources. And if we can't wrap everyone in the world, so we want to send you out with armor and weapons to find someone good.
Totally. If we can't represent everybody, we at least want to make sure that everybody has access to good information. So thanks again for participating, and have a good rest of your day.